Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm Stuart Craner. Thanks for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the previous session with Linda Hill and Herminia Ibarra. Intellectual powerhouses all, and we're following that up with two more intellectual powerhouses from the Thinkers 50 ranking, fixtures on the Thinkers 50 ranking perhaps we could describe them as, and multiple award winners as well. So in this half hour we're going to have a dynamic and distilled conversation with Roger Martin and Rita McGrath. Roger Martin is the former Dean of the Rotman School of Management in Canada. He's the author of Playing to Win, and his most recent book is When More Is Not Better. And you like the word better in the title, don't you? Because you're also the author of Getting Beyond Better as well, Roger.
True. I hadn't thought of that.
We're also joined by Rita McGrath, who's a professor at Columbia Business School. Her most recent book is Seeing Around Corners. Previous book before that was Beyond Competitive Advantage, or The End of Competitive Advantage. Thank you very much for joining us, Rita. You're at home in New York?
Princeton, New Jersey.
Princeton, New Jersey. Strategy. Let me start with a kind of a more challenging question. It seems to me that strategy is strangely unfashionable. If you think about 20 years ago, it was still kind of the legacy of Mintzberg, and it was easy to find the great strategists. But now there isn't a kind of a cadre of strategic thinkers. They seem to have been overtaken by the people who followed innovation. Am I right or wrong? Roger?
You know, I do think that strategy has become a bit of a lost art, and so lots of people are in the camp of, all you have to do is execute, all you have to have is a bunch of OKRs and you can execute. And I also think that there's a certain aspect of strategy that became viewed as this is how you take advantage of customers, right? So here's how you can win by taking advantage of customers, as opposed to, in my view, what strategy is it's a way to deploy resources that make the world a better place, right? If you do that cleverly, it'll make the world a better place. But I think that got supplanted by this sort of shareholder value driven strategy is about making sure that regardless of what else happens to your employees or your customers, your shareholders make lots of money. So I think that sort of tarnished it a little bit.
Rita?
Well, I'll add to what Roger said, which I agree with. As you know, I talk a lot about transient and temporary advantages, and we have fundamental disagreements about that. But as competitive advantages get shorter, what starts to happen is leaders need to get better at all three phases. So the innovation and growth phase, where new strategies come from, the exploit phase, where you're making money and extracting money, and then the transformation phase, where whatever you used to be doing is kind of run out of gas, and now you need to move your company onto the next thing. And so one of the things I do think that's happened is strategy and innovation, which used to be separate categories in a way, have really become much more blurred. So I think what you're picking up there, Stuart, is right, that we're seeing a lot more attention to innovation under the context of strategy.
And how has the pandemic challenged your ideas? What has it encouraged you to think anew about, do you think?
Well, one of the things that I certainly think about is habit. Right, I've done a lot of work on this question of what drives customer behavior, and a lot of it is habit. And the pandemic has been the greatest habit interrupter for sure since World War II, and maybe even more so than World War II. So kind of just thinking about how you reestablish old habits, help people create new, better habits. It's a time when a lot is up for grabs, because the habits that made people sort of automatic, they didn't think a lot about what they were purchasing, or even they didn't think a lot about who they were working for or how they were working for who they were working for. All of that is now up for grabs. And so I think it's in many respects, a time where there better be some careful and clever thought, and we have a chance to design a lot of better things now that so much is up for grabs.
So that's kind of an optimistic interpretation that in any
Yeah.
crisis there's an opportunity.
There's an opportunity. I mean, you cannot
Yeah.
downplay all the human suffering that's happened by any stretch. But if we are looking forward, I try to be optimistic, and I don't think it's Pollyanna-ish. I think there is a reason for some optimism.
And do you think, Rita, that companies and the strategists you come across are infected with this optimism and a feeling that they can start anew, really?
I think there's a lot of that. I think what has also been problematic is most leaders haven't been really taught or trained or schooled in how you deal with high uncertainty situations. And so a lot of what they bring to their decision making is what we've inherited from low uncertainty situations. And if you go all the way back to the beginnings of the field of strategy, things were not moving as fast back then. And so I think one of the interesting things for me personally is, I've worked in high uncertainty my whole life as an innovator, an innovation person and a strategy person. And the world has kind of come thundering over this way. I share Roger's optimism. I think one of the fabulous things that has been an accompaniment to the real dark sides of this pandemic is we're just open to so many new ideas right now, and there's just a spirit of experimentation and let's figure this out and let's put one foot in front of the other. So I think what happened for a while was people were kind of frozen in the headlights, and now I'm beginning to see a sense of, well, it's not going to be over by Easter, it's not going to be over by July, it's not going to be over by Christmas. We better start living with what we have and learn to do better.
I mean, you've worked closely with, sorry.
I was just going to say, I do want to be careful about something. The truth is that in every era, right, humankind has always thought it's the most tumultuous time. Things are changing faster than ever. Henry Mintzberg is the first to point it out to me, Scientific American, 1870, the quote, things are changing faster than any time in the course of human history, blah, blah, blah. So one thing I guess I want to be careful of is characterizing this so differently on that front. For me, what has changed profoundly is, if we're looking at the world of business, is the incredible incursion of analytics into business. And MBA students, Rita would know, I know because we both hang out in business schools, are taught the only good decisions are database decisions, right? The only good decision is a database decision. Unless you have the data, and if you make a decision without the data, you're like a slovenly kind of manager, and that's been taught now conclusively for 30 or 40 years. And it turns out, right, the last time I checked, there is no data about the future, right? None. 100% of data is in this place called the past. And so if we're teaching everybody, in order to make business decisions, you must analyze the past, right? They will not invent the future, right? And that is, to me, what's changed. What's changed more than anything else is the domination of analysis in business decision-making that is increased and is continuing to increase. Data analytics is the biggest thing, and that is the biggest threat to innovation and suppressor of innovation in the modern business world. You've got to imagine possibilities, imagine a future that does not now exist, and if you're an excellent manager, you will figure out how to make that happen. We have a chance to do that. We've always had a chance to do that, but it's been suppressed over the last several decades.
I would add on to that in any time you're looking at making a decision, right, you've always got three kinds of information. And the kind that Roger's referring to is what I call lagging indicators. Great data, stuff that's gone. Then you've got current indicators. Where are we right now? What's our level of employee engagement or net promoter scores or anything like that? Then you've got leading indicators. And I do think that perhaps we're heading in the same direction. I see strategy as really going from this almost mechanical analytical exercise with lots of spreadsheets to something that's much more about pattern recognition, about seeing the weak signals, about hypothesizing about possible futures. I see a lot more of that in the strategy work that I do and that I see practitioners doing.
So you'd see...
Absolutely, but it's not what is taught. Full stop. It's simply not taught in business schools today. Students, right, have to kind of insist on and demand it, right? That's why there's the great interest of students. MBA students are now fantastically interested in design and design thinking, all of that. The schools themselves are not. And everybody says, oh, no, what about the D school? The D school is great and run by kind of great friends of mine, but it's not. People think it's at Stanford Business School. It is not. It is completely independent from Stanford Business School. Was not created by Stanford Business School. Was created by engineering professor with the help of has no Plattner money, David Kelly. And so the schism is, I think great strategists out in practice understand that strategy is a creative act and it's about creating the future, and you've got to go vastly beyond data to create the future. But that is not what is being taught to each one of the 150,000 plus MBAs that have come out of America a year and 500,000 that come out of the world.
We go back to pattern recognition, Rita. I know during the war, Bletchley Park in the UK, I know the spying CIA, they recruited poets because they were very good at pattern recognition. Mm-hmm. So perhaps we should get more poets, and if strategy is a creative act, we need more poets.
Intel for years employed science fiction writers, for that exact reason, to tell stories about the future and help people expand their imaginations.
In what sense is strategy about telling stories about the future?
It is.
Totally.
Strategy is imagining possibility, right? And then choosing from. This goes back to Aristotle, right? So this goes back 2,500 years. What Aristotle distinguished between is the part of the world where things cannot be other than they are. If I drop that glass, it'll fall down. That's part of the world where things cannot be other than they are, right? That's physical rules. And then he distinguished between that and the part of the world where things can be other than they are. In the prior world, he said, be scientific, analyze all the past data, because guess what? The future is going to be identical to the past. But he warned, 2,500 years ago, been ignored by the world, he said, in the other part of the world, don't use the method he created, the scientific method, right? Do not use it. And he said, the job in that part of the world is to imagine possibilities and choose the one for which the most compelling argument can be made. And so what he said is it's about the dialogue amongst possibilities, right? So you have to still have rigorous logic, and you have to have the possibility win the day, right? That's why he called it rhetoric, right? And so yes, strategy is about both imagining possibilities and then picking the one for which you have the strongest logic, not the strongest data. And if you pick the one with the strongest data, you pick something that is incremental, the same as what you're doing now, or maybe a little bit different, because you can get data, lots of data for that. So that, you're right, that is the exercise of strategy. It's not taught that way. The major firms practicing in it don't practice it that way, and that's one reason why strategy is not achieving what it should be.
I wonder if they teach Aristotle in business schools.
They do.
And I think that relates to what you said before. I mean, Rita, you're at Columbia. Mm-hmm. Could strategy be taught differently, as Roger suggested? If judgment is the key thing you want people to practice, can that be taught?
I absolutely think it can be taught differently. And here's where I would. I'm not sure I completely agree with the blanket condemnation of the way strategy is taught in business schools. I think there's some basics. And, Roger had an illustrious career based on those basics. But then I do think we are, especially in the courses that combine strategy with entrepreneurship or innovation or whatever, I think there is more of that kind of thinking. I would say that the principles can be taught. You can take people through a strategy process. I guess where I'd be quite critical is a lot of the large consulting firms who are strategy firms, right, sort of do this analytical thing. You have this data nobody else can understand how to interpret, and then you produce this beautiful report. And I think where the field is hungry for new developments is, how do I go from imagining the future, making the best choice, but then actually making it happen? And that's where I see a lot of gaps between what's being offered in the world of thought leadership and strategy and what's being offered to people who actually want to make it happen.
because what you're talking about, I think there's some agreement, I think, between you is that strategy is becoming elevated to embrace more kind of abstract aspirations, as opposed to be grounded in strategy means improving profits or ways of improving profits over the next 6 months or a year or whatever. So it fits. It's got a more purpose, a grander purpose.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I mean, there's a bit of Back to the Future in that I think in the very early days there was more of that sense to strategy, but I do think that what is new, and it's only been happening for the last decade or decade and a half, is the stronger integration of concepts of design and creativity into strategy. So those were two kind of relatively separate fields, as Rita said, strategy and innovation, or strategy and design. And I think there are things that we can learn from the world of design, for example, that can be integrated to make strategy a much more productive, forward thinking process. So I think there's a real course forward, and there's a small number of people who are interested in it, but I think are doing good things on that front.
Yeah. Who do you look to for inspiration? Who are the small number of people?
Do you want me to start?
Yeah. Because
sure.
Rita,
Well,
one thing that strikes me about you, Rita, is that you're very keen to be involved in dialogue and debate about the ideas. You're very active, especially over the last 18 months. You've been on webinar after webinar, but not only the ones you speak. You like to get involved and get involved with the development of the ideas. So, who are you looking to for inspiration?
Well, for example, and I think this supports Roger's point that we're starting to see a greater appreciation for the creative side of humanity in strategy. I mean, when one of the lead partners at BCG publishes a book called The Imagination Machine and links the concept of strategy to that, that's a pretty strong signal. So that would be Martin Reeves, who you know well. So people like that.
A good book as well.
It's a terrific book. Very accessible. I mean, if people want to kind of get a real walk through what imagination's all about, I think that's great. There are a number of people that I've been talking to, with ideas I listen to, who wouldn't necessarily be plugged into a strategy box. So people like Ram Charan, I think, has a lot of really interesting things to say, especially about digital. So yeah, I think there are a lot of sort of emerging people that are kind of coalescing around this idea. And I think the conversations are, to me, they're starting to get a lot more interesting. I mean, I remember an era, GE would be the classic like poster child for this. Your strategy people, would be 50 of them, and they'd have, either slides or a whiteboard or something, and it would be pie charts and 5-year plans and industry analysis and all that stuff. And I think we're seeing that hasn't disappeared, but I think we're seeing a lot more playfulness, a lot more thinking about what could be in the future. And I think there are many authors trying to explore that terrain.
What do you think, Roger? Who's inspiring you?
Well, Aristotle, right? I'm digging more deeply into Aristotle. Dick Buchanan at Weatherhead is who wrote one of the single most seminal articles, I think, of relevance to business and design. Is another one. There's an Australian named Tony Goldsby Smith who's a terrific thinker on this front. I think what IDEO is doing on this front is terrific. One of my most beloved proteges, Jennifer Riel, went there to help to incorporate this fusion between design and strategy there. So I think there are people. But I would go back and I would encourage every business person to go back and read some Aristotle. He created the scientific method and then warned against its misuse. And I think it is so powerful a message for modern business.
Can you think of a CEO who would read Aristotle? Because I'm always struck when I go into CEOs' offices how few books there are
Yeah.
And they very rarely have any books about strategy, which I kind of think they might have.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. Actually, the only one I can think of is Jiang Min, who's the CEO of the Chinese company Haier,
Yes.
who's the best read
Yes.
CEO I've ever encountered.
Yes. A.G. Lafley was well read. He had a liberal arts, Hamilton College liberal arts background, and he loved to read. Another guy I know who loves to read. You wouldn't necessarily expect it from San Francisco to Silicon Valley based firm, but Drew Houston at Dropbox is a phenomenal reader. So I think my take on CEOs who I hang out with lots is they need a strong case to be made to spend time on a book, but if you make the strong case, they'll read it. They won't just pick up books because they're 24/7 and very busy, but they'll read. I don't know. What do you think, Rita?
I would agree. They're very time stressed. They're kind of let's get to the point people, so they're not going to, I can't see many of them leisurely sort of leafing their way through a book that might or might not have a point to make. But I do think there are CEOs who've embraced a lot of the ideas that you do need to devote some time to reflection. So one person that I can think of is David Coady, who just stepped down as the CEO of Honeywell, incredibly thoughtful guy. And one of the practices he used, and I think this ties into this whole idea of imagination and making time for these things, is he would do what he called X days, which is just he'd block out his calendar. And he said, the trouble with being a CEO is, you have a meeting at 8:30 and then one at 9 and then one at 10:15. And it's just like it eats up your whole day and you don't have time to think. So he was very disciplined about doing that.
Do you think there's a sense, I get a sense when we talk about strategy that we still look through a very Western corporate lens. We understand strategy in that way. And you both travel the world a lot. Do you get different responses when you lay out your ideas, say you go to Asia or Europe? Roger?
I kind of think that the core of business is not so dissimilar, but I do think there are nuances and flavors that are different. I think it is much easier, and these are obviously generalizations, but it's much easier in general to talk about something more cooperative in the way of competition in Europe than there is in the US. I think in general, again, it is much easier to talk about where you want to get to competitively 10, 20 years from now if you're talking to somebody in Asia. But I mean, those are obviously generalizations. There's a curve around those, but those would be the biggest differences, I guess I would see.
A question from Alex Osterwalder.
Aha.
Are we going to see a revival of strategy and strategy making? Which suggests, of course, that there's been a decline of strategy and strategy making, but we've kind of discussed that. Are we going to see a revival? Is strategy on the way back? In 2 years, will there be wall-to-wall strategists at the Thinkers 50 event when it's a real event in London?
That's a great
question.
question.
And you can lead them into the room. You two can read them in kind of Pied Pipers.
Follow us. That's right. That'd be great. I love that image. I don't know that strategy's actually been in decline. I think it's massively misunderstood. But if you think about strategists as a function of, say, all consultants, right? They're a tiny proportion, and for good reasons. A great big strategy study is going to be what, $750,000. So would I rather spend my time on that or spend my time on a $50 million business process outsourcing arrangement? So I do think there's the people that are involved in the actual work of strategy relative to the population at large is not so large. I wouldn't say it's been in decline. I do think one of the things uncertainty does is it makes people eager to find frameworks upon which to base their choices. And one of the things I've always admired about Roger's work is the emphasis he's put on strategies about choices. Like if the opposite of your strategy is just barking mad, you don't have a strategy. One other point that I would like to make is I do think we're moving into a world where we're seeing creation of value go from traditional product and service attributes much more towards interactions, ecosystems, and what Eric Joachim Steller calls interaction fields. And that's going to create different parameters to which strategy needs to pay attention.
I should point out the Business Ecosystem Alliance is one of our partners. We're running out of time.
You like
Roger,
that?
yeah, no, it's good, thank you. We're running out of time. Roger, when more is not better, your last book came out last year. What happens next? Have you got you must have another book in the pipeline. You've been
Yes.
writing an article a week for Medium. I see you've been publishing.
Yes. Yeah, no, I'm in an odd position in that I sort of have two, because I've got one that is already slated to come out in April, A New Way to Think, which is on business models and how to rethink 14 different business models that I think are considered received wisdom but aren't very good. And then, as you say, the year-end strategy, a year of Medium articles on strategy will come out in a book thereafter. And I continue to add to that, including this morning. That's right.
Well, it's worth downloading the articles before you have to buy the book.
Yes, yeah, no, that, well, it's
Well, I said yes to our viewers.
they're all free, but the publishers are saying, well, you should publish it as a book, and I say, knock yourself out if you want to. That's fine with me.
And Rita, your book Seeing Round Corners came out in 2019, I think, didn't it? So you must have written another one in the intervening
Well,
period.
I'm working on one. Who isn't working on a book? So that one's really about time zero. So the inflection point has happened. The moment is upon us. Now what? And I think it's something I've been researching. As we move through the pandemic, it's offered a lot of sort of first line perspectives. And then the other thing is, Stu, I've been very frustrated at the idea that you've got a lot of great thinking, but I want to recall what we were talking about this morning, which is this about thinking or doing? So one of the things I've been working on for a while is how do I take some of these concepts and create tools that people can actually use? So Alex Osterwalder and I gossip about this a lot, but that's what's taken up a fair amount of my time in the last 6 months or so.
Rita and Roger, I'm sorry, we're out of time. Really appreciate your insights as always, and look forward to the forthcoming books. Next up, we've got Activists at Work. Megan Rates, Hubert Joly, Christian Sarkar, all moderated by Dory Clark, with or without a cat, we don't know yet. But hope you can join us for the next session. Roger and Rita, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.